Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Micah Cloward. Coach Cloward is Director of Sports Performance at Weber State. Before Weber State, Cloward was the Director of Strength Conditioning at the University of Sioux Falls. And prior to that, he had stops at Illinois, Oregon State, Wisconsin, Utah State, and Idaho State. He served as the interim head strength conditioning coach for football at Oregon State, where he had been an assistant strength conditioning coach for football and women's swimming. Coach Cloward played football at Snow College before transferring to Idaho State, where he was a two-time academic All-Big Sky performer. Cloward graduated from ISU with a bachelor's degree in exercise science and earned a master's degree in physical education, athletic administration. Cloward is a certified strength conditioning coach by the NSCA. So, welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, I'm glad we were able to set this up. I know we had talked earlier, and it was kind of the heat of football season, and that's kind of a rough time. So we postponed it a little bit, but now we got some time.
Yep. It's nice because you find those little lulls in the calendar, and it's good to kind of get away and hopefully talk some good shop today.
I hope I got some good stuff, and we'll see how it goes. I know I'm interested because you run a conjugate style system in the college setting, and not everybody runs that. A lot of guys run a tier or something else that might be just different than some of the ideas that go along with what you're doing. So how did you land on this?
Well, and it goes back to, my mentor, one of my best friends. His name's Evan Simon. He's the head strength coach at Davidson University. And I worked under and for him, starting at Utah State and then at Wisconsin and Oregon State, and it was blessed to go to all those different spots. And like for him, like it was a background where when he was, he had done some powerlifting, had gone into it. It was at the University of Kentucky as a graduate assistant, and along those same times, and I don't know the exact crossover, so but was there, I believe, briefly, or at least cross paths with Jim Windler. And was lifting and a crew out there for a while. And, he, was very familiar with like Elite FTS with Westside Barbell and would do some things. But for me, like when I started interning at Utah State, like that was kind of my first exposure to maybe that methodology. Up to that point, it had been, I would say solid. When I was at Idaho State, I had some solid, strength and conditioning training, thinking of like that's 20, 22, 23, 24 years ago. And so again, the field has grown and developed, and it's not that ideas and different things that were happening back then. It's just the information so much easier to access and to get around, and so much easier to share, just like doing this podcast. And so when I got to Utah State, it was almost like it was a foreign language in the sense of like it was just different than what I had seen. And now like getting into it is one, and there were times where we would run like fairly like almost like true West Side like principle, like max effort day, speed strength or dynamic strength effort days, and kind of going for it in our upper lower splits, at least with football. But it was the ability to kind of get through there. And then I would say through the years and up to this point, and from last 3, 4, 5 years, where I've kind of been running my own programs, especially with football, and that's where one say I want to give a shout out to coaches like yourself, who, whether it's on the private side and you're having to work with different populations or at smaller schools, it's one of those things where when you have the ability to work with different sports, different athletes, and you're doing stuff, the ability to do things, try things out and go, maybe there's a little softer landing than maybe, if you're thinking like the multi-million-dollar organizations that like Power 5 football programs are at this point, it's one of those where at this, like, you have a little easier time to try some different things. So I was blessed in that way, that once I was able to work onto the staff at Utah State, like there was an ability to kind of try different things, do different things, and we were like we were actively pushed to do that, and it wasn't like, hey, here's this. It wasn't a cookie cutter approach of like saying, hey, here's what you need to do. Every team needs to train the same way. It's got to look, if it doesn't look exactly like this, then it's wrong. And so there was a good opportunity to learn, grow, and do those things and mature through the years. And I think and now looking back at it, I feel very blessed and fortunate And it's one where, like, at Wisconsin, I worked with football, but also was the head over volleyball and track and field. And so, like, you think back on some of the track and field and volleyball programs, and was it like a true West Side barbell? No. Conjugate type situation? No. But the ideas and the concepts were things that for individuals that, now that I look back at, you had Olympic performers, Olympic, athletes on there that they were able to benefit from, just because from a mindset standpoint, for me, it's always been, okay, hey, the movement, the exercises, those there's not an end all be all in it. It's how can we improve your ability to perform, and that's something that resonated with me personally. Is like, going through when I was an athlete, I wasn't a power athlete. I didn't get into strength and conditioning as like, okay, hey, I love lifting. I do. But it was more like, hey, the preparational aspect of it, as opposed to the sport aspect of it, was what kind of drew me. The intensity, the passion, the atmosphere, and how you can adapt and grow was what drew me into strength and conditioning, as opposed to like saying, hey, I want to lift. That's all I care about. And so I think it was something that, looking back, that some of those athletes really responded well with, because it wasn't just like, hey, we're in block 2, phase 3, we're just working a 3-position clean or whatever it may be. That if kids needed modifications, it was like, okay. So for me, like, a conjugate approach, and at this point, it's very, very hybridized. Like, there's all sorts of, and that's what, to me, I mean, realistically, what conjugate training is like, if you boil it down, is just, you're training multiple attributes at the same point in time, and you're doing that consistently throughout the year. And there isn't, one or the other may have a higher, like, percentage, or higher, like preferred or emphasized quality on a given day or a given week, but at the same point, you're always trying to raise that stuff up. And so that's something that, like, has really resonated with me, and it's the ability to do those things. So, for me, in a conjugate mindset, it's less about, okay, hey, we have to max out on this day, and we have to do our speed day, 3 days later, 4 days later. It's, how do we take that mindset of saying, how do we emphasize strength, power, speed in a team sport model now in the collegiate setting, and help kids grow, adapt, learn, develop, and ultimately, like, I don't care what model you're running. Realistically, if you're working with team sport athletes, you can train any way you want to do, but you're training in a concurrent / conjugate, or however you want to call it, mindset, because no matter what, if they're still playing their sport or they're still doing stuff, you're training multiple attributes at the same point. And that's what conjugate training is to me. Sorry, that kind of weaved around on that one for you.
No, that's fine. And I think you kind of landed where I may have. When you start doing this, you have an idea of what it is, and it is very powerlifting based ideology. But as you go through it, well, then you start switching your mindset into an athlete, and then, like you said, you're attacking multiple spots of athletic development.
Yeah.
Through the idea of bringing them all up at the same time, and then switching your focus. So are you kind of looking at, you got the off season, so you're hammering strength, and some of the other qualities are a little lower, but you're still hitting them maybe. And then as the season goes on, are you switching over into like a power speed model, and then the strength becomes less of a focus?
No. I realistically, like, because for me, it's one where we just got done, like, so, we didn't have necessarily the season that anybody in the building or outside the building necessarily hoped. We got a team that needed to learn and grow and adapt and come together a little bit, and we had some rough times, and finished on a strong note with a win, and we're looking towards the off season right now. But like many coaches will do, like, even in the in season, not that we do, especially for the main movement type stuff, whether it's a squat or press, any sort of Olympic variation or pull variation. We're like, I don't do tons of volume, but we cycled through, different, starting points or rep ranges, however you want to look at it. But from an intensity standpoint, we cycled through and tried to waive our intensities throughout the season. And so for us, that was roughly 17 weeks long. And so from when we started at the beginning, which is the longest training block that we will have, is our in-season block. And for us, that started at the beginning of August and ran through to, right before Thanksgiving. And so for us, like as we went through and did stuff, and I used some different variations in there in our in-season model that I've seen, and I think worked pretty well. But when we went into like a heavy single, not that the goal was to max out, but it was just to feel a little bit of a heavy weight. I want to say, and not having enough, as a rough ballpark, we had like 60 or 70% of our athletes at or above their strength level that they were at in the off season. And for me, that was a short off season, for when I got here, because I got here in March, and so it wasn't like a full scale like year into it. And so, but even in the off season, ultimately, like we'll always have some priorities in there. We're always trying to go. But as I've had exit meetings with kids and coaches, like ultimately, like the things that we need to do in the off season are the same things we need to do in the season. We need to be faster. We need to be stronger. We need to develop lean body mass and to appropriately, get kids to where they need to be. And so that may mean some like hypertrophy work. And that's one thing, for whatever the position is, there are many differences, but ultimately, like there's a lot of similarities in there. And so throughout the year, and that's why to me a conjugated or concurrent style approach really fits well in a collegiate model, is we will have different segments of time. Like for us, we'll start back January 6th, and we will have it's about 9 weeks before, 9-10 weeks before we start spring ball. And there's a week off in there, let's call it spring break in there. So it'll be about 4.5 or 5 weeks, and it's one thing to say, well, we'll do this phase and then we'll go into this phase. But realistically, we'll try and waive, the different models. And that doesn't mean that we're just going to go straight heavy singles, week 1, week 2, week 3, or anything like that. That's our max effort work. Because realistically, max effort work can take a lot of different forms. And that could be sets of 5 or 6. And that's just your heavy strength emphasis of that day. But for me and for us, ultimately, like we will always try and prioritize speed and trying to get a maximum velocity kind of output throughout the year. And we're blessed here. We use a catapult GPS. We have a number of units that we utilize. We'll always try to have a change of direction or however you want to phrase that, an acceleration, deceleration element in there. In season, what is that? That's practice, right? Like that's our. But even in practice, we're trying to push, and there are points in the year, trying to get once a week where we will do just 2, 3, 4 sprint reps, where it's just there's nothing else going on. The entire team, like we're gonna run 2 or 3 sprints, and so we're trying to get exposure to a maximum velocity or crossing that 85-90% threshold, and we have an ability to monitor that. We speed profile everybody. When we come back in January, what are we going to do? There are going to be days when we do our running and our movement sessions that are purely speed focused or movement focused, not just conditioning or not just here's this. And that's maybe a little bit different approach even for like maybe some of the football staffs looking at it like, well, it's January, we'll just go strength, and then we'll go into some speed and power as we get into it. It's like realistically, we're trying to train those attributes all the way through. How much we emphasize each may be a little bit different in there. And I know that's a long way, but like say we get 8, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, and then we start spring ball, and that's going to be about 5 weeks long, and then our semester is over. And so from about the 3rd week in April towards the end of May, they'll kind of be on their own in a discretionary time. And that's one thing that maybe from the differing from the private sector to, and depending on what school you're into the collegiate sector is very different, is you have very segmented times of the year. And so for me, that's where an approach it like saying, hey, it's not that we just wanted a shotgun, we just want to throw everything against the wall, whatever sticks and goes. Like there's planning and there's a bunch of thought that goes into it. But ultimately we want to keep a bit of a stimulus in. Because even right now, as kids are in a discretionary time for us, in between our in season where we can have organized lifts, because right now we can't have organized lifts until we start back in January as part. And if they do, it's a different story. But in that transition program that they have, There's a max speed emphasis. There's a change of direction, acceleration, deceleration emphasis. There's a conditioning, a movement. Like, hey, we need to stay in shape. If you stay in shape, if you stay fit, if you stay fast, if you keep the stimulus in there, you don't have to retrain as much, or you don't have to, you can retool, you can reshape, you can reload, but you don't have to retrain it. And it's the same thing. There's a max strength emphasis, and there's also a kind of a repeated effort. And that's one of the maybe the difference if you're looking in terms of how much we're emphasizing. Like right now, or in early January, there will be a little bit more emphasis on maybe a repeated effort standpoint, or emphasis when it comes to our lifts in the weight room, just because like we're coming from an in-season phase, and right now like we didn't do tons of volume, especially on our main movements. And so we're trying to relay that foundation, trying to rebuild some movement patterns. And so we'll have that opportunity. And it's just how much the emphasis of it is in whichever segment of time we are in a given year, if that makes sense. Sorry, kind of went off on you there.
No, that's okay. I enjoy hearing it, and then I can compare what I'm doing or what I'm thinking with what other people are doing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it seems like maybe we're thinking along the same lines here. Once you get out of season, you kind of can go back to that work capacity model
Yep.
and hypertrophy model and get everybody healed up, get a little stimulus in there, reacquaint with the movements, and then you're ready to go in January where you can start taking off, assuming your guys go off on their own and do this.
Yeah. And even if they're kind of doing their own thing, because there's a time and a place for that, for kids to kind of do. And I mean, Division I football is, in Division I athletics in general, like there's a ton of pressure on that, and we put a lot of pressure. And for me, like I know, like I push hard for these kids, and it's one more. And I'm not saying I'm unique in that. Like everyone, like there's a price that has to be paid, and that's it. It's because ultimately you're playing ball at whatever level. Because we're on ESPN, we're on those, like you're playing in front of a lot of people, or have the ability to play in front of a lot of people. And so if you're not prepared, it's not gonna be pretty. And so for us, like we kind of go, and so in times like this, like where it doesn't have to be as rigorous as far as like, having your thumb down on them a little bit, like guys, hey, if they're doing it, and then it's just like for me, like let's say they're going back and they're going outside and they're from the Kansas City area, which I know I've had athletes and been around athletes from down to your neck of the woods, especially kind of being in that Illinois Sioux Falls area. Is we're sitting there and saying, hey, if you go home, you're going to Voodoo, like, hey, work, go. Like, what are you doing? Like, be smart. Like, here's this, and kind of get a different thing. And realistic, I think that's something that resonated, whether it's been my thing around for myself or other coaches. I know Coach Simon was great about that. Like, if there's another place, like, cool, awesome. Let's work within some guidelines if you want to connect, but it's the ability to kind of do that, because ultimately in a conjugated mindset, like, are we all working towards the same goal? Yeah. And that's when we're like, it's a good time, but it's also like you say, like we're trying to reframe, retool, and kind of put ourselves in a position where we can hit the ground running when it does come time for us to get back to organized workouts.
Now you said something in there, and I had a question on this because I follow your Instagram, and you had added your story, a reel, and I couldn't agree more. I don't think some athletes understand it, but being elite, Division I athletics, while we want optimal dose to make it to the next level, our high school athletes not understanding what optimal dose is. Like you have to do more than what you think you have to do to play at the highest level in college athletics.
Yeah. I know what I would say to that is, and it's not unique to me. It's like there's a ton of people out there, and the high performers or coaches, athletes. I mean, if you just want to show up, and for our kids, if you just want to show up, and you think it's going to happen, nope, that's not how it works. And for us, it's when we're like looking at our schedule when we get back in January. Like we'll have movement sessions, 2 to 3 times a week. We'll lift 4 days a week. there's going to be that, like there's an aspect of it. And that's just the minimum. That's the minimum of what we can do. Not that more, and even if there was an unlimited time frame, not that more is necessarily what you would need, but that doesn't take into account things like treatment, rehab, the ability to like set your personal self up, because those are team sessions, or those are big group sessions, and so each individual person may have a little bit different need, and that may require you to show up like 20-30 minutes early to prep and prepare your body. And I want to talk through for my kids, or the guys I get to work with, and the kids I've had the pleasure before this to work on. Like I'm always promoting, say, hey, let's sit down and go through what you may individually need. And that could be nutritionally, it could be lifestyle, it could be, hey, here's what you need to do from a soft tissue / mobility aspect. Because when we get in those group sessions, it's when we're like, there are times where I've got to deal with 35 kids in the room at the same point. And it's hard to be completely individualized. And one thing that's different, like for us, is we may only have 2 or 3 coaches on the floor. It may just be me on the floor, depending on what the other sports schedule is. And so it's the ability to hammer and put kids in a situation, and it means we got to trust kids to do the work as well and set them up for success. But ultimately speaking, it's what is going to help you get to where you want to be isn't going to be what got you. And so for our kids walking through the room, that's going to be a big message through, is like, you want to step into that starter. Like everyone wants to start, but no one wants to like put the extra work in to raise their ability level up. They just think it's going to be given to them in many cases. And that's something that like it hits home. And I know like right now, that's when we're, for kids today, which is different from when I grew up. And I imagine maybe for you as well. Like it wasn't like you were looking on Instagram or TikTok and it was like, okay, you can see it, which is really good because you can see a bunch of different things and you can hear different like things and see different approaches from coaches or different places. But at the same point, like, just because you look at that doesn't mean it's going to get the work done. But like for our kids, like it's one of those where when it's time to go, it's just like kickoff in a game. Like when we start a session, like there's not a ton more warm up going to happen. like we're in our work sets, it's time to work. It's not time to like feel it out and get going. So that's going to be a heavy emphasis. And ultimately throughout the country, like the higher and higher you go, you have to put in more work. You have to put in a little more extra effort. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lift more or lift heavier or lift what it may be. It may mean that you just need to take an extra 20-30 minutes on recovery work, mobility work, flexibility. It may mean that you had a hamstring issue, and so you have to prehab that area just so that it stays going. Because once something happens in the body, like there's always a little bit of a compensation. There's always something. We're trying to minimize those things through good, well balanced, holistic training. But at the same point, like the higher and higher you go, and right, wrong, or indifferent, the higher you go from level, whether it's rec league, club, high school, college, and depending on the level in college, and you see some of the things now, and in our sport and football, like you look at it, it's a professional model. Let's call it what it is. The higher you go, it's a more and more professional model until you get into the different like actual professional leagues. And when you get to the professional league, like one thing that's crazy, and having some colleagues and really good friends who coach in the NFL, or players that will come through the facility, or people that and that go, like you could not train at all. And if you're just genetically gifted enough to do it, you're going to be okay. Because guess what? Like ultimately your job is to perform. Like if it's football, basketball, baseball, soccer, whatever it is. And there's individuals that can. Now, what's the longevity process of that? It goes into it. And what are your lifestyle factors that go into it? Like I think I saw something, I think it was Steve Nash the other day. It's like, what would you do if you could go back in time? It's like, hey, I have better habits. I would do this thing. And everyone kind of looks back probably with a similar mindset, saying, if I would have done this, it could have helped me, maybe with a little bit better longevity or a little bit more productivity. But to be a high level performer, like one thing that gets lost is like you have to sacrifice something. And like the reality is, if you're sacrificing film time, if you're sacrificing that little bit of extra work, you will not be as good as you think you can be. And many times, and for what I will say is, like I see athletes all the time or that are frustrated with their playing time or with their role, but they don't do the things. Their habits suck. And there's guys that play and are good performers that their habits suck, but they have enough genetic gifts that they can get away with it for now. But at each step in the process, that shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks.
Yeah, it's some guys can get away with the bare minimum, but for the majority of your athletes, that's atypical. That's not your everyday average athlete you're going to pick up. It's a few freaks that lie on the outside, and
even then, ultimately, like, thinking back in to say, like, and this is not to be like, oh, look at me, because it wasn't anything that I did or the programs I was a part of that we did to make some of these kids. Like, having been around, individuals that were on the U.S. women's national soccer team, the U.S. women's like national volleyball team in the Olympics, going World Cups on the soccer side or Olympics, like medaling in volleyball, track and field, like Olympians who are on the Olympic team, not just like in the trials. Like, we're talking NCAA All-Americans, like, by and large, all of them. And on the football side or basketball or other sports side, same thing. Like, guys coming through. And there's a young man, my first day here at Weber State, like, I'm walking in the facility, kind of coming through, I step in, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden this and he's a man. He walks up and he said, "Hey coach, do you remember me?" And of course, like, it was one of those where, like, from across the room you didn't see him, but he was an athlete that I had been around at Utah State, and he just happens to live in the area and developed a relationship. So it's one of those where, like, in off times he'll come through the facility and train. And all of a sudden, here's a kid who's been in the NFL for 8 years, and you see him who doesn't have a contract and is very naturally gifted, is great. And again, for what he does from a movement lift standpoint, like, for what his body needs, it's really well. Like, he knows and understands, and that's one of the things that's going. But he'd be in here for 2 or 3 hours, and sometimes it might have been shorter. It just depends on the day or what he needs. But he's sitting there, and for all those individuals and being blessed to kind of see them, it's not, again, like they're genetically gifted, but ultimately the best ones. And for the young man I'm thinking of, he's sitting there, and like, he did it, and he didn't have a contract. He wasn't there. He was prepping to say, okay, if I get a shot, I need to be ready. It wasn't, well, I need to get ready because I got a shot. And he was sitting there putting in work. And it wasn't until I want to say it was like the first week in August. It might have been 10 days into August that all of a sudden he gets a call and goes. And I could be mistaken, but I want to say he just blocked a punt in a game for the NFL team that he's playing on right now. And like, if he wasn't putting in that work, especially as age goes and the older you get, the more wear and tear gets onto the body. Like, it takes a little bit more. It takes a little bit, but like, you're sitting there, and for all those kids, like, it's putting in, and it's working while you wait. But
now I'd listened to a few podcasts you were on and how you made some of the decisions you made to get where you were. And you were talking about deciding on a school and asking who the rival was. And that kind of developed this question, because as I watch kids in the gym, the importance of having a nemesis, even if it's your best friend, you need somebody in the gym that is going to push you and hit them buttons that makes you perform at a high level. When did you figure out how important a rival actually was?
Man, I don't know. That's a great question right there. I think back, and like, one of the things that draws, I may go off on a tangent, I'm sorry. So the other day, one of our kids who's in like a programming exercise science class, something like that, he asked me, he's like, "Hey, we were talking about this in class, and it was like, what do you think of CrossFit?" And I'll get to your question here in a moment. And so we had a long conversation about pros, cons, this, that, like all the other. But ultimately, I said, this is what to me, why CrossFit is very, and for whatever your mindset is on it, why there is a draw and an interest to it. And to me, it was something that's similar to the weight room, to preparation, to coming into this line of work professionally. and ultimately maybe that rival. Uh, there's an intensity and a passion that comes along with sport. Like there's competitiveness. Like if you're getting into sport, like there's competitive, and there's different outlets, there's different ways, and for certain things, like for individuals, that can be very much intrinsically like an intrinsic motivation, or it can be an extrinsic motivation, and for whatever level of competitiveness you are. But I remember, and it's one where like, especially for my nephew, because my nephew went to my rival, like to the rival high school. That's where my brother went, and for his family, that was a crosstown rival. But like I think in sport, depending on the sport, and for football, that's one where like for them, they were better than us. But when I think back into like high school and going and doing it, not only that we ever beat them, but there was a passion, there was that little extra like emphasis, there was that little extra motivation, if you will, and just that intensity, and that's what I told the young man on our team with it. Honestly, that's what I believe like draws people to like things like CrossFit. It draws people to like training facilities like yours, where they can go. It's competitive. They can feel intensity. They can go and you can train hard, and you can grow and develop and do all those things. And why are sports like really really like popular? Why are those activities over maybe some others? And it's not that other activities or extracurricular type things aren't. It's because of that passion going. It's saw something last night. I'll probably butcher her name. West Virginia's school president. They're looking for a new head football coach out there, and they're kind of going through interviews. And he's like, I can't get 65,000 people to come to a chemistry lecture, right? It's one where like for him, like, and for many schools, it's one of those where like, and there's nothing that there's very few things that can feel that. And there's that passion, there's that intensity in a rivalry situation where you go, where there's a little bit extra juice on the line. There's a little bit something personal to it. And for each place, that's one thing that's challenging, I think. But for me, like coming into it, like a new situation here at Weber State, I may be a little bit, I understand the landscape here better than maybe I did at some places. But ultimately, when you get to a place or you're in a new situation, like you need to invest into the place and you need to become part of that. That's where I think one of the challenges in collegiate sport athletics right now, and maybe a little more predominantly in football and basketball, where it's become a little more transitory in nature, where it's become a little more like a professional league, where it's like you just come and go. There's free agency, for lack of a better term, and guys will jump in the portal. But one of the things is like sometimes you got to come in and you got to invest into the place. You got to go and you got to put some roots down. And that may not mean you're successful. You may not get everything you always wanted. But when you start investing, you start learning about a place, however long that is. And so it's becoming a part of that. And so along my journey, and what you referenced, part of like where I went to, like I chose, I had multiple scholarship offers coming out of junior college. And the reason I didn't go to one place, even though they were better competitively, was because when I sat down with the head coach, like it was like, yeah, we don't really have, we kind of think everyone's a rival. And it was like kind of an oatmeal answer. And that wasn't something that resonated. And so for where I was at, and I'm not saying that was the right decision. And ultimately it led down to this path. So it was the right decision. But it's one of those where having passion and intensity in what you do and where you're at and finding that. And it means you got to invest into the place. If you're a kid, if you're an athlete, if you're a professional, you got to invest into what you're doing. You got to be where your feet are. And if you can do that, like you can go, and like it means like you can go, and that little extra motivation, some of those games, it's awesome.
Now, when I was getting ready for this and when I first started looking at your stuff, this is what really caught my eye because I'm starting to get down some of these rabbit holes myself. But the recovery and how important it is, and you've turned to tempering.
Yeah.
What put you on a tempering path?
Looking back through in this one, we're like, I don't want to butcher it for any of the names that may come up. I'm not trying to name drop or do anything, but again, I feel very blessed professionally, and to have been in some of the different situations and coaches I've been around, because ultimately, like for me, like like I've been around some great coaches, and I'm not saying I'm a great coach. Hopefully I've stolen as much as I can from each of them to become better myself. And I've learned, and looking back, to try to learn from the mistakes, try to learn from the situations where I didn't handle things maybe great. But realistically, I remember, and that's where, again, being in the environment that I was professionally, especially, coming out of, college, interning, going, like, while I was still playing at Idaho State, like I was training a couple of teams as a graduate student. But when I got to Utah State, being in an environment where it was like, hey, you need to learn different things. You need to do it. And it wasn't like saying, hey, you need to become this guy so you can be a part of the staff, where I think there's a little more prevalency now to do that in the collegiate. It's like, there's your catapult guy, or there's your recovery guy, or it was like, hey, we were at Utah State, and we were blessed because we had 5, 6 strength coaches, in different capacities. But it was like, hey, it was kind of like an all hands on deck. And we need to be, it was, hey, you need to be well rounded so you can help your athletes. So it was like, hey, research and learn about nutrition, research and learn about different things, whether it's Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, learn how to do it. It was, hey, what are different recovery modalities, different things that you could do? And so it was always an environment where we were pushed and challenged, whether it was vocally, formally said, like, you need to research these things to become well rounded, or just the environment it was. And I was around great coaches, um, and great minds who thought differently than each other. It didn't like there were differences of opinion, and it was one where, like, it was the ability to be in an environment that was challenging, that was motivating, that was all those things. And then you fast forward and being able to go to Wisconsin, and you're learning, and there were different things, like, what was Kelly Starrett and some of the becoming a supple leopard. And I say that as a very, very, like, broad term of just the different, like, movement strategies and patterns, and using bands or using a barbell to smash, because realistically that's tempering. And so being exposed to that, using like voodoo floss or floss bands, and the ability to kind of mobilize or distract, or just open up and using different things, and not just staying in a box and saying, well, we do this, and, like, we'll just, if there's an issue, we'll send them to the athletic trainers and they'll put ice and stim on it. Because guess what, like, that may be okay for some things, but not everything. Many times, like, there's a finite, and everything has a finite ability to help or influence and do their thing. So that was maybe, like, going into it, and we're talking 10, 11, 12, 13 in there. In 2015, get out to Oregon State, and we're going through, and I can't remember if it was in 15 or in 16, or somewhere right in there. We were going to the CSCCA conference, which is the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Conference. And so we were flying out of Portland, and we are going down to, I don't even know where it was, wherever we were going to. It might have been like Fort Worth, wherever the conference was. We were going, and one of the guys on staff, his name's Chris Anderson. I believe it was Chris who said it. He said there, and he was like, "Hey, like, we're waiting for our flight." It's like, "Isn't that Chris Duffin?" And we look over, and all of a sudden we're sitting there, and Chris Duffin, who was like Kabuki strength, and super smart, very, very, like, awesome, whether it's strength, recovery, any of those things. But he was on our flight, so we're kind of sitting there and going. And they happened to have a booth, and that was right as they were kind of emerging. It was a very niche situation. I think that might have been their first conference. They had just come out with maybe their Duffalo bar, the boomstick, the pain pill, and their version of what the ex-wife, which is the geisha roller. But it was one of those where, like, I can't remember exactly when Donnie and Chris had, like, teamed up, or however that had went with Donnie Thompson and Chris Duffin had gone, whatever that timeline was. But then Chris had kind of come out with those things. So we go to the conference. That's in early May, and so we talked to them. We stopped by their booth, on the floor, talked to them, and say, hey, we're in Oregon State. You guys were just up the road. And I want to say it was like a week or two. It might have been the next week, or a couple weeks after that. Like, I believe Chris and Rudy Cadlub came down to Oregon State and, like, brought a geisha roller, brought a boomstick, brought a Duffalo bar. They had not, I don't believe they had come out with their transformer bar yet at that point. And that was even before like their open trap bar that they had come out with. But they had come down, and so from a tempering side, they came down, and all of a sudden, like we're sitting there and they're doing like they're showing something like, hey, here's a couple like points for the check that, and all of a sudden it was like, yep, like here's this, and you know they're talking, we're talking shop, we're doing it, and from that point forward, it was like, and I may be wrong, but like, you know, I'll stand on this. I don't know if anybody can correct me on this. If they can, like, I'd welcome it. I'll eat crow on this. We may have been the first collegiate strength program to have a Duffalo bar or buy those things from Kabuki Strength. And so we got it. We immediately started implementing it with our kids. And whether it was that, whether body tempering, you know, as the years progressed through, it could be reflexive performance reset. Then we started learning different ideas and just all the different things that you could do, whether it's voodoo floss or bands, or it could be foam roll or trigger point, or all the different things that we started. So it was then. And so realistically, from that point forward, or those points forward, there was the ability to like utilize those things and do and implement it for our athletes. And so it's now coming on 8-9 years of doing it, and it's one where you see the benefits, you see the relief for the thing, and looking for our kids here at Weber State. Not saying that they maybe didn't, because I don't know if they did. They may have done different like concepts of it, you know. But I brought, like, from my garage, I brought my roller, brought my paint put, brought my broomstick, and use them all through the year. And it's the ability to see different things, or target different things. And it's not the end all be all. It's not one size or hey, this is the only thing we do. And it's not to step on our sports medicine team's toes either. But I can confidently say that we had individuals that they'll get nicked up, and the ability to utilize the thought process, which I think is big. It's the ability, because it's one thing to have and implement a device, a modality, like the ability to think through and use experience that has been gained in good ways or bad ways over those last 8-9 years, to then implement that in different ways and strategies on individual and the team basis. That had that it was really big, and our guys loved it, and they took to it, and we felt it. And in some cases, I'm not going to say it's perfect, it's not some miracle, it's just the ability to use it. It kept people on the field, and it minimized our time lost to maybe injury or different things in some cases. And there are cases that we had kids who, you know, because again, like, I'm not going to force it on a kid, that maybe they didn't do some of those strategies, or they didn't do some, and ultimately it limited them. And in my opinion, and that's one thing that's hard to maybe look at and say, but like ultimately, like, you know, as much as kids will take care of their bodies or not take care of their bodies, that makes impact. But there was a definite impact on the field of play for us this year.
There's a few different things in there I noticed. Now, I just have a tempering YouTube education that I have not been able to get to one of the clinics they put on.
Yeah.
But one thing you said in there, and I did notice, so I had an athlete, they were new to a program, and they had tweaked a hamstring. They didn't want to tell their coach because they didn't want to lose ground with what they were doing inside the program. We tempered them out. We're like, let's just see what this does. Let's just see if this helps you. Tempered them out, used voodoo floss and a racquetball to like pinpoint the pain areas.
Yep.
They went back to their program the next day. They said they didn't even know they were hurt. Nobody knew they were hurt. The coach, nobody. It worked so quickly and put them back in a spot to be successful that nobody even really had to know. It wasn't even an injury at that point.
And I think, and you know, it may be in a perfect like environment, even if the coaches know and are doing it, because there are times when we like a coach come to me and be like, hey, you know, Micah, so-and-so has this going on. What can we do? It's like, hey, let's come in. And sometimes that's like, hey, they need to see the trainers. They need to see a doc. They need to see a PT. Sometimes they're, and it doesn't mean that they need to be held out either. And sometimes, like, there's the old adage, like, are you hurt or are you injured? And sometimes, like, again, like, kids get tightened up and go. It doesn't mean you may have a strain, and it doesn't mean you need to be held out, but the ability to target it. And realistically, what is it? It's not some miracles. You put compression on an area, and I think Donnie does a great job of communicating that. It's like, you put compression on an area, you put some pressure on it, and the structure of the bodies can adapt and do it. And ultimately, it's not like you're sitting there and you're taking like a needle and trying to push it through them, but you take it and it helps work out some of those things and helps relax some of the tensions that build up. And you know, whatever the exact mechanism. And if we had, whenever the double blind placebo, study comes out, it'll show whatever mechanism in the body gets pointed. What, I don't know. Like, it's been long enough since I've been in school. Like, oh, the muscle spindle, the Golgi tendon apparatus, whatever it is, it helps. And you feel it. It's immediate. It's one of those where, like, there are times my wife, like, I go home and, like, she may not want nothing to do with me. She's like, you got to roll me out. And it's crazy because you take this 120 or 130, 150 or smaller, 30, 40, 50 pounds, and you target an area. And there's points where it's like, okay, but the ability to relax some tensions and go, it's crazy. But 100%, like what you saw is spot on. And it has a way of hitting the body just right. Painfully at times. Not that pain is, the goal of it, but the ability to help it. That's awesome that you had, and you think about that kid now, all of a sudden, like, it's one of those where it's sitting there and saying, hey, they don't miss practice. And kids want it. I don't know if kids love practice all the time. Like, I don't know that I love it. I didn't love practice all the time, but the ability, they want to play. They don't want to lose ground. They don't want to look bad in coach's eyes. And so the ability to do that is huge. And that's awesome for your athletes. They had such good response. And again, it sets them up that when you say, hey, here's this, here's an idea that you need to do, you need to sleep a little bit better. They're more open to it. Anytime you can help an athlete, and that could be like, hey, you add 36 pounds to their squat, they're more open because there's like, hey, they feel the difference. They feel they feel the growth. And so that means that they're more willing to buy in. And ultimately, we're always on that spectrum where the more we can get buy-in, the more we can get that individual effort and mentality to be in the right spot. And so that's great. And tempering is one tool for me that I will utilize, and for many coaches that utilize it. It's not the only thing that we'll utilize.
Right. There's different modalities. And then I'll hit you with this because I don't know. I know what I think I see, but I don't know what you see. I used to think that cramping was a hydration issue. And, then you talk to other people and it's a stretching issue. But as I've tempered more and more, I feel like cramping, your typical crampers are always on the verge of cramping. If you look at their calves after you start tempering and figuring it out, if you look at their calves are on the verge of popping all the time. Like, they're tight. They walk around tight. You put that in a game situation where everything gets elevated, they're going to cramp up on you every time.
Yeah.
Tempering seemed to help those athletes with that. Is that something you've noticed, or is this an offshoot that I'm seeing?
I think there's definitely something to it. And that's what's challenging, is that there isn't like, like, I think what's hard is too often we want just, hey, here's this pill, here's this one answer. Like my daughter last night, she's doing math facts. Like, it's what 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. It's not like 6 times 6 is 36 unless it's hot and humid. And then, but it is one thing. And I think for us, you take in everything you just said: sleep, movement, mobility, flexibility. You take, what are you doing from a soft tissue / recovery standpoint? What are you doing from a hydration? What are your nutritional habits? All of those factors play. The environment plays a factor, definitely. Not just like it's hot, not just it's humid. You take the arousal state of like competition, and that plays a factor, right? Because everything's going, and you're like everything has to fire. But it is one where, like, you look at it, and I remember the first time here when we did it, like, it was in camp when I brought the roller up, and you think about what football camp is, at least for like in the collegiate setting, it's long days in August, or I guess July in some cases, where you may be going 4, 5, 6 days in a row, and you're running, you're going, you're having to move. Like, you got kids who have ankles that are taped or knee braces on and different things. And then we're still lifting, we're still doing stuff, we're still running. And you think about you take the calves in general, right? And because that's kind of where you would like pinpoint. You see how much tension is stored within the structure there, whether it's the Achilles, or the different musculature of that lower leg, or different parts of the body. And that's one where like you see like the ability to kind of go. And from day one, all of a sudden you get a couple guys going, and then they're coming in between meetings and stuff like that. And the hips, okay, back, okay, hammies, oh yeah, the ham, that might be a little tight depending on who it is. And skill guys are running, so those hammies get, there's a lot of tension that builds up in there. And then all of a sudden, but pretty much everybody, like it'd be me if I lay down right now and got rolled out. You hit that calf, boom, and it is something different. And in terms of that, but you saw like day one, and then all of a sudden 2 or 3 days later, you're going. And whether it's they just are used to that stimulus, and so there's not that trigger, that shock, I guess, for the mind and for the body. But there's a relaxation there. There's the ability for those structures to relax a little bit better because you're able to apply enough pressure, or pressure in the right way. I guess if I can say, I don't know if there's a right way or wrong way, but the right way that allows it to diffuse and go. And Donnie's been saying that for years and years and years. It's like you take, and again, when you take, whether it's I don't know what you did, 3,000 pound total, for his first guy at 3,000, you take that how much pressure that's going through the structures of the body, whether you're a power lifter, strength athlete, you're a basketball player, tennis player, you think about the pressures and the forces that go through, and you talk about like, how do you prepare the body? How do you prepare the body for 7-8 times, your body weight, in ground reaction forces when you're jumping, running, cutting, and then you got to do that for 2 or 3 hours, and to be a high level performer at it. And so the ability to build that and diffuse that, it takes pressure. Pressure, helps you grow. And it's one of those where like definitely you saw the calves, the structures of the calves going. And for us, like, I'm not going to say we didn't have cramping issues at different points that we didn't have, but I also saw like you took some of the guys in maybe good ways or bad ways for what we saw this year. That there were guys that, let's say they pulled up because they got tight. They didn't pull anything. It's just like, and I don't know how many times you hear that. Yeah, I was kind of moving, and it just feels like my hamstring got tight. Okay. Tight doesn't mean pulled. Tight doesn't mean like you just rip something off the bone. There's some micro trauma going on, but for the guys that came in, all of a sudden we would temper them along with some other things and to work on some movement, some mobility. Like, hey, maybe their movement strategies are maybe their movement patterns just kind of suck. But all of a sudden, those areas relaxed, and it was the ability for them to stay on the field. And there were individuals that didn't do it. And it's one more, I think this year for me, I look at it, it's like I tried to have a little more step back perspective, and maybe I didn't succeed in that all the way every time. But the ability to kind of step back and look at it, because, it's a new team, it's a new situation. I like every day until I get the middle of March, every single day is a brand new day here, because I haven't been through this phase, this time. And we were talking through camp and the season, like for this team, like I hadn't seen these athletes, and I hadn't been with these athletes or these coaches here. And so to see it, and like you saw some guys and how they took care of or didn't take care of their bodies, and the impact that it had very tangibly on the field and for what they were able to do, what they were willing to do, and the difference there. And tempering played a huge and vital role for some of our guys in a really positive way.
This is a weird analogy, but it might sum up what I think I see. So you're from Casper, some of the best trout fishing in the world in Casper.
There's some good fishing. Except for Colorado people come up to get them.
Yeah. So the comparison is some athletes are trout and some athletes are bass. And what I mean by that is a trout spends his life in moving water. A trout is very, very, very strong. He's almost in an isometric state all the time because the water's moving, and he has to hold against that water. Where a bass is in a pond,
yeah,
he doesn't have that stimulus. Some athletes, their muscles are almost in an isometric contraction all the time. They're just built like that. And without tempering, I don't know that you can ever get that to let go so that they can experience what life's like as a bass.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, and you're from, yeah, I mean, down there you get a little more bass down there than you get up in Wyoming. Like there, I don't even know if there's bass in Wyoming. I'm sure there are someplace in some lake. Anyway, that's a great analogy, and it's so true. And another thing, not just the tempering, some that like help, and whether it's from a methodological or whatever that word, that I don't know what word I'm trying to say. I'm trying to sound smart. I ain't a smart guy. I'm a knuckle dragger. Um, but from a mindset standpoint or an approach that really helped along the lines, because you take, and I don't know how familiar you are with reflexive performance, that RPR, or on the higher or the more practitioner side, I believe. I don't want JL to get upset, or I don't know Chris or Cal Dietz, but and again, like I think about the connections I had. So Evan is went to school or was at Kentucky when JL Holdsworth was there for a moment, and so knowing JL and being able to meet and know, and I'm not saying that he's like that JL Holdsworth my best friend, no, but like knowing JL, having talked to him multiple times, many times, having gone through the RPR courses, and then seeing that, and again for the last 8-9 years in doing that, and for whatever people may think of that, but you take that approach of saying, hey, the body is an electrical system, and so if you can flip the right switches, or you can target the movement patterns of the body, and again, it's coming from Douglas Heel's Be Activated stuff. It's the ability that you can target areas of the body, and maybe there's just maybe the firing pattern is just off. And I know Chris Corfus and Cal Dietz and JL talk a lot about that, and that's big emphasis within the course, the RPR courses, is if you can identify the movement compensation strategies, you can repattern things neurologically so that you have an ability to fire more efficiently. And the more efficient the system, then you can display whether it's power, strike, speed at a much higher rate, or just a much more efficient rate. Which again, and you take maybe the ability to help relax areas neurologically and relieve some of that neural tension or that tension that builds up, and that's something that has been huge, and something that I will implement and work with our kids as well on big or small scales, individual or group situations, and it just depends. And then you couple, and that's where the ability to go. It's not just a one trick pony. It's not just like one box that we're working out of, or that I'm trying not to work out of. And it's one of those where if there are things that you can do, I don't care. If it's going to help our athletes, I want to know about it. And sometimes that's just a matter of like being exposed to different things or coming across different pathways, different movement strategies, different whatever the exercise is. If there's going to be something that's going to benefit our kids, and you may not know until all of a sudden you get down the line, but you got to be willing to try it and try different things. And in some cases, like, and having heard it, like, had one coach talk to me. He's like, yeah, if I rub myself like that, like that's going to really do it. And it's like, yeah, it could. And for you, it may not. And that's one thing I think from that line of thinking too was very, very big. And I remember seeing like, and you could say, okay, hey, it's a more subjective, or it's a more subjective kind of line of thinking as far as opposed to an objective way of thinking, where a lot of times, and even for me, like in strength and conditioning and lifting, there's very tangible, finite, objective thing. Did you get stronger? You added 2.5 pounds. You added 20 pounds to your bench, your squat, your power clean, your press, whatever it may be. And there's a subjective things like I felt better doing this. And ultimately, like there needs to be a blend of everything. You got to be able to substantiate, support everything you're doing. But there is still those influences. Like, how are you feeling? And so for your athlete, when they got done, and there are people that I've been around that say, "Oh, you think they're just putting a roller on, we're gonna do it?" And I'm talking about like athletic trainers, PTs, like doctors. No, that's just gonna hurt them. But then you ask the athlete, "Well, how'd you feel?" "I feel better." That's all. That's what matters. And then the ability to substantiate and quantify that helps. And so for like your athlete that had the hamstring, they went, there was no issue of practice. They were able to continue to train, practice, and lift without anybody negatively looking at them. That is quantifiable. It is subjective. It is objective. But there was an implementation strategy that was taking place, and then it adds to that toolbox. And so for all those things that going into it, and so for cramping, for movement, for strength, for speed, for all those things, like there's a lot of different things you can go, and there's and yeah, I mean, what do they say? Like the more you know, the less you realize you actually know, or the more you learn, somewhat along those lines. And that's been one where I think, again, being learning professionally, growing up professionally in the different stops is seeing all these different coaches, of whether they're sport coaches or strength coaches, and realize that, hey, there's a lot more out there. There's different ways to do it. And you don't have to sit in some cookie cutter approach. And ultimately, how you do things is going to impact what you do, maybe a little bit more than maybe actually what you do. And that's the thing. And so for what we're doing is I'm looking into the off season here. There's going to be a heavy emphasis not just on what we do. There's certain things we need to target and improve from a strength, power, speed, from how we physically are, our lean body mass, all those things. But ultimately, we can have the greatest program in the world, and if we go through it half-hearted or half-assed, it doesn't matter. Or you can look at it, and there's stuff where, and I'm not saying that I implement a program that's like really, really advanced or whatever, or maybe mediocre. It could be crappy, but if kids buy in, if the kids work their ass off, and I believe it, right, wrong, or indifferent, you can do push-ups, bodyweight squats, wall sits, jumping jacks. But if you do it at a champion with a championship effort and mindset and the ability to really attack, and you've got complete buy-in to the level that you can, and that's always, you're going to be way more further ahead than the guys who sit there and be like, well, here's this complete progression of everything, and we're going to get here, and here's our outputs, and here, we've got this velocity on the bar and this blah 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 blah. Whatever it is, cool, awesome story. But ultimately, like if kids don't buy into it, and they may buy into it, and that's great. And ultimately, we're all chasing that same thing.
Well, I'll hit you with this last one because I know you got a full day ahead of you.
Oh, you're good.
What we're seeing now in college football is a lot more parity with the transfer portal. The talent is becoming even everywhere. So if when talent equals out, what moves the dial?
Money. I don't know. Like realistically, like it's finding the right talent. Like as we're looking into it, and again, that's you're recruiting, and you look in the NFL, and again, you can talent will get you in the door. How you work, how you develop, how you do things is going to help along that. And then again, like you got to do it. And one of the challenges, I think, this thing is like, why are they transferring? Why is there that stuff? Like, what is their why? What is any of our why? And that's the Rubik's cube that needs to be figured out. And for the parity that there is, like you take like Arizona State, and they were last in the Big 12 last year, and they just won, and it's awesome to see. And for the buttons that need to be pushed, whether it was kids that were in the program for a number of years that developed and just went through those lean times and just had that chip on their shoulder and worked with that chip on their shoulder, it's or they're guys that just got there, or that were in the transfer portal, that they were able to say, okay, hey, like for the free agency market that it is, we were able to get that, and they got the right combination right there. And I mean, I see your sweatshirt there. Is that a Nebraska shirt?
It is, yes.
There's been a lot of lean years there for Nebraska.
There has been, for sure.
Where I do have to give my guy Willie Jones a shout out, because he was at Nebraska on the Pelini staff, and they won a lot of ball games. They didn't necessarily win the ball game at times, and it was hard. But like you look at it, like there's been no shortage of talent to go through there. and they train and they were trained and they train differently or they train the same, whatever it may be. But ultimately, like for you take today's day and age, like for us as we get into it, and this is where again, maybe bringing it full circle to the beginning of our conversation. Like if you look at it and say, okay, hey, well, we're going to slow cook everything. We're going to take 2 or 3 years to train and teach you, and we're going to have to get a 9 and 10 out of 10 perfect technique, and we're going to go from block 1 to block Z. You know, I don't know that you can do that very well. And in today's day and age, in the football and probably even men's basketball, in some sports, like you've got to be able to get them in, get them working, and you need to be able to teach at a high level, and you need to be able to connect at a high level. And I think that that's something that has resonated with our players here. And it doesn't mean that I'm like hopefully I've learned a lot from a lot of mistakes, and then stolen as much as I can through the years and different stops, good, bad, and indifferent, from all the different places. And realistically, the kids, and I feel like what resonates with our kids here in the weight room for me, and from a performance standpoint, is I'm going to hit them with the truth. Like it's one where they're going to get it. I'm going to push them. There's an expectation. I'm going to go, and they're going to work from day one. But we're going to teach along the way, and it doesn't mean that technique isn't important, because you got to be technically sound. You got to be proficient. You got to move, and that's a spectrum that you're always moving depending on the athlete is going. But there isn't a cookie cutter approach. And in today's day and age, you've got to be able to train different modalities. You got to be able to train different attributes from day one to whenever they leave, and that could be 5 months in, it could be 4 years, 5 years. Hopefully, we're getting out of the time frame that you've got 7, 8 year college kids. It's a lot, but however long they're in the program, they should continually develop and grow. And that's something that, for me, in my mindset, in my opinion, from what I've seen, a conjugated approach and it's less. It's probably not even a concurrent or conjugate. It's just, to me, it's just a well-rounded approach that you're going, and that we're going to target speed, we're going to target power, we're going to target mobility and movement, how well we move and do those things consistently, and we want to push and have intensity as well. And so, to me, it fits very well in that model. But for kids who are transferring and going, it's a time where, yeah, you're choosing. And ultimately, for coaches who are recruiting them, or why kids are choosing certain schools, and you see kids that are transferring because maybe it wasn't the right fit. And maybe maybe how an individual will be in a different situation, it resonates, or the coaches or the environment that they're in will resonate a little bit differently or a little bit better, and it clicks for them. And we had an individual who, by the end of the year, was one of the leaders on the team. And hopefully he has a shot at the next level of the NFL. I think from what he did on the field, his genetic ability put him in a position, not the program, not some certain lift, and not body tempering, not things. All those things were maybe there for him here. They may have been there for him at other stops too. But this was his third school. And for whatever it was, I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't with him. But hopefully he has a shot. And he put himself into a position by how he played on the field to maybe have to earn an opportunity, or at least a shot to earn that opportunity. And ultimately, it's one of those where for kids who are transferring, sometimes it takes a little bit different fit. And so that's where I think what resonates here with our athletes, and it's not perfect all the time, and because we have guys that jumped in the pool too, that there was something that was missing for them here. But ultimately, it's like, how can we put you in the best position to succeed, whether that's 1 season, 2 seasons, 5 seasons, whatever that may be. And it's a wacky world. It's a rapidly, like college football, college sports in general, is a rapidly evolving like monster. And right now it's one where, like, guess what? Like, if you don't adapt, you're going to go. And that doesn't mean, like, sometimes you don't push the right buttons. And maybe that means, like, all of a sudden you go and you're supposed to be because you take ASU, if Arizona State's the example, like look at Oklahoma State. They won, I think, 10 ball games last year, and all of a sudden they were there. And it doesn't mean that it always goes right in sports. And one thing that's incredible about sports is the ball bounces kind of funny sometimes, especially in football where you got a weird shaped ball, and you could be, really, really close and really, really far away at the same time. And for us this season, that was something that hit. We lost 6 games by 1 score, and it's one of those where like that's a difference in 1 inch here, 1 inch there, maybe a little bit more buy-in, maybe it's a little bit different like technique, maybe it's we need 5 extra pounds on a squat. I don't know, but we're going to attack that and attack it with a mindset that we can make up the difference. But that's the challenge right now in collegiate sports.
Well, Coach, you worked with me on this. I had a inability to tell time. You would think that adding and subtracting by 1 would be a lot easier, but when you throw time zones into it, it definitely screwed me up. So,
no, you're good, man. It's been great. Appreciate you having me.
I'm glad you come on. Thanks for working with me as I screwed the times up and allowing yourself free up your schedule, I guess. Yes, thank you.
Well, the nice part is like right now the schedule is more open than it probably ever is, just for the sake of time we're in. As we're getting like finals are right now, and so it's pretty quiet. Unfortunately, we're not in the playoffs, and I mean that's realistically where I wish we were. And I mean, it's a Wednesday, so if we were in in-season model, we'd be having a lift group here in about 20 minutes. But unfortunately, we're not, and so that's something that we got to fight. And I'll scratch and claw and do everything I can to be in that situation a year from now. So good.
Well, the plan this summer is to get out to Utah and do some stuff. And if I get out that way, I'll shoot you a text. I'd love to see your facilities.
Yeah, come on through, man. Come on through anytime. You're welcome. Appreciate you having me. It's great to kind of talk a little bit of shop, and wish you nothing but the best, and hopefully yours and the kids you have the opportunity to work with, continue to grow and develop.
Well, thank you, Coach. I know talking to guys like you definitely helps.
Hopefully I've just rubbed a little more roughness off that board for myself and for you as well. So good to go.
Well, have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Coach.
Thanks.